Montana Territory, 1886. He almost drove past her. Jonah Calloway had been pushing August hard since the storm broke properly at 4, leaning into the rain with the specific resolve of a man who had 2 miles left between himself and a dry barn and intended to cover them. The road had turned to mud that sucked at the wagon wheels with every rotation. The rain came sideways and then straight down and then sideways again. He saw her in his peripheral vision, a shape at the edge of the road that was wrong for the landscape, too upright for a fence post, too small for a tree. He pulled August to a stop and turned. A woman. She was standing with her back to the wind, bent slightly forward in the posture of someone who has been walking against weather for a long time and has stopped pretending it is temporary. She was wearing a blue dress soaked through so completely it provided nothing. Her hair was black and plastered to her face. Her boots were caked with mud past the ankle. She was holding something against her chest, something wrapped in a gray blanket, curled around with both arms in the posture of a woman making herself into a shelter. He set the brake. He leaned over the side of the wagon. "Ma'am," he said. She looked up. Her face was young and her eyes were dark and doing two things at once, assessing him with the careful attention of a woman alone on a road and not quite concealing the exhaustion underneath. "I'm fine," she said. This was not true in any observable way. "You're soaked through and it's getting dark," he said. "The temperature is dropping." She looked at the wagon, at him, at the road ahead, which disappeared into rain and offered nothing. The blanket moved. "Is that a child?" he said. "My daughter," she said. "She's fine." Jonah looked at this woman standing in the Montana Territory rain, holding a baby against her chest like she was the last shelter standing between the child and the weather. He thought about his father, who had told him, "You stop for people on the road, Jonah. You stop and you help and you don't ask them to explain themselves first." He looked at the temperature dropping, at the 6 miles of open valley, and at the thing wrapped in the gray blanket that had moved. He moved over on the bench. "Get up," he said. She looked at him. "You don't know me," she said. "No. I know it's getting dark and cold and you have a baby." He held her gaze through the rain. "My name is Jonah Calloway. My ranch is 2 miles south. I have a barn and a house and a fire." She was deciding something. He could see it, the weight of whatever she was carrying making the calculation take longer than just weather and distance. She looked at the road ahead, at the sky, at whatever conclusion the arithmetic arrived at. "May we sleep in your barn?" she said. He held out his hand. "You can sleep in the house," he said. She took his hand. He pulled her up, and she settled the blanket in her lap, and Jonah clicked at August, and the wagon moved south through the rain. The Calloway ranch house had been built for 2 people and occupied by one for 3 years. This was visible in the way that empty spaces become visible, not in disrepair, because Jonah was not a man who let things fall apart, but in the particular blankness of a place maintained without being inhabited. The kitchen table had 1 chair pulled out. The 2 hooks by the door had 1 coat on them. The shelf above the fireplace had a photograph, and a space beside it where another had been and was no longer. Mave noticed all of this in the first 30 seconds. She noticed it the way she noticed most things, efficiently, filing the information, building a picture. The man who had picked her up was a widower. He was not wealthy, but he was not poor. The house was solid, the windows intact and recently cleaned. He kept the place the way a man kept something he respected but no longer loved. She also noticed the cradle in the corner of the main room, pushed back against the wall, slightly dusty in the specific way of something put aside rather than forgotten. Small, built for a newborn, never used in any visible way. She did not ask about it, but before the week was over, she understood. Jonah would be forced to tell her why it had never held a child. Jonah went to the kitchen almost immediately, moving with the efficiency of someone who needed the activity. Mave went to the spare room he indicated, clean, clearly unused, but ready in the way of a man who kept things prepared without anticipating them being used. She laid Clara on the bed and unwrapped the wet blanket. The baby looked up at her with the wide, focused attention that 4-month-olds gave to everything, apparently unconcerned by the storm or the strange room or the hour. "You," Mave said quietly, "are entirely too calm." Clara considered this and decided to be satisfied with her situation. Mave changed her into the dry clothes she had managed to keep dry in the inner pocket of her bag, a small mercy, the one thing she had done right in the packing, and wrapped her in the dry blanket, and felt for the first time in 6 days of train cars and diligent stages and muddy roads the specific relief of a person who has been moving and has stopped. She allowed herself 1 full minute of it. Then she heard Jonah in the kitchen, and she thought about a man who had not asked a single question, and she got up. She was going to go help with whatever needed helping with, because that was the only honest currency she had. Jonah made soup, not a performance of hospitality, simply the most practical thing available: beef stock from Sunday, root vegetables from the cellar, the heel of a bread loaf. Mave appeared in the kitchen doorway with Clara on her hip, her hair still damp but combed back, wearing a dry gray dress. She looked at the pot. She looked at the counter, where the bread heel sat in moderate danger of being forgotten. "Can I help?" she said. "It's soup," he said. "It doesn't require 2 people. "Everything requires 2 people," she said. "One to stir and one to watch the bread." He looked at the bread. He handed it to her. She sliced it and set it near the heat with the ease of someone who had been doing this in kitchens since she was tall enough to reach the counter. She stood with Clara balanced on her left hip, the one-armed economy of a new mother 4 months into the arrangement, and looked around the kitchen with the same quiet inventory she had done in the main room. The pantry, she noted, had been organized by someone who understood ranching but not provisioning. She filed this. "You live alone?" she said. "Yes." "How long?" He stirred the soup. 3 years. She did not ask what had changed 3 years ago. She had seen the cradle. "I'm sorry," she said. He looked at the pot. "Thank you," he said. They ate at the kitchen table, the one chair pulled out and a second brought from the corner, and the rain was loud against the windows, and the fire was warm, and Clara sat in Mave's lap and looked at Jonah with the comprehensive attention of a baby encountering a new face. He looked back at her with the careful expression of a man who had learned to be cautious about things that required him to feel something. Clara was 4 months old, red-haired, and her eyes were working their way toward some color that had not yet committed. She had a small, serious face that was currently turned entirely toward Jonah with the focused intensity of someone conducting an assessment. "She's looking at you," Mave said. "I see that. It means she's decided you're interesting," she said. "She doesn't look at walls." He looked at the baby. "What's her name?" "Clara." He received this without performing a reaction. "She's 4 months. 4 months and 1 week. He nodded. He went back to his soup. Clara, apparently satisfied with her assessment, dropped her head against her mother's shoulder and closed her eyes. Outside, the rain continued. Inside, the fire continued. Jonah Calloway ate supper across from a woman he did not know and her 4-month-old daughter and did not ask why they had been walking alone on a Montana Territory road in a storm. He had told her she didn't need to explain herself. He had meant it. The fever came at 2 in the morning. Mave woke to find Clara hot against her side, the dry, papery heat of an infant fever. She sat up and checked the signs the way the midwife had taught her, breathing slightly fast but not labored, color high but not blue at the lips, fontanelle normal. Sick, but not in immediate danger. Still, she needed cool cloths and hot water, and she was in someone else's house at 2 in the morning. She went to the kitchen as quietly as she could. She was at the basin filling a small pot when the light changed behind her. Jonah stood in the kitchen doorway with a lamp, still in his work clothes. He had been sleeping in the chair. "Fever," she said, keeping her voice low. "Clara. I need hot water." He took the pot from her hands without comment, stirred the coals awake, added 2 pieces of wood. He moved with the efficiency of a man who had been up at difficult hours before and was not slowed down by them. "How high?" he said. "High enough to concern me. Not high enough for the worst fear." "Go back to her," he said. "I'll bring it." She went. She sat beside Clara and put a damp cloth on her forehead and talked to her quietly, not words exactly, just the sound of the voice that means safety. Clara was awake and unhappy and hot, and she looked at Mave with the expression of a baby who expects the person responsible for the world to fix whatever is wrong with it. Jonah appeared in the doorway with the pot and a cup and a small bowl. He looked at Clara. Something moved through his face in the lamplight. She saw it clearly, a thing that came and was managed before it fully arrived. He sat in the chair in the corner without being asked. She did not tell him to leave. She made cool compresses and kept Clara nursing and watched her breathing through the night. She did not use the willow bark in her bag. Clara was too small for remedies she didn't fully understand. Cool cloths and feeding and watching, which was what she had and what she used. Jonah stayed in the chair. He did not talk much. He kept the fire and the lamp. He went to the kitchen once for more water and came back and sat with his elbows on his knees and watched Mave and Clara with the expression of a man who has found himself in a situation he did not choose and has decided that leaving is not the right response. At 3 in the morning, Clara finally slept, the deep quiet sleep of a child whose body has finished fighting something. Mave straightened and felt the ache in her arms that 4 hours of holding meant. She turned. Jonah was watching. "She's sleeping," Mave said. "I can see that." "You should sleep," she said. He looked at Clara. "Is the fever down?" She touched the baby's forehead. "Still warm. Coming down." He nodded. He did not get up. "You can go," Mave said. "I'll sit with her." He looked at the baby for another moment, then at Mave. "I'm fine in the chair," he said. She looked at him, at this man in a corner chair in the middle of the night in his own house, sitting with a stranger's sick child, and she thought about a cradle in the main room that had never been used. She understood, in the way that one grief sometimes recognizes another, what it cost him to sit in that chair. She did not say this. She said, "Thank you for stopping on the road." He looked at the window, where the rain was down to gutters dripping. "My father told me to stop for people," he said. "It's not a virtue, it's a habit." "Some habits are virtues," she said. He looked at the baby. "Is she going to be all right?" "Yes," Mave said. "She was strong from the day she was born." She lay down on the bed beside Clara, close enough to feel when the fever was gone. The lamp was low, the fire was quiet. Inside there was warmth and a baby sleeping and 2 adults in the small circle of all of that. It was enough for tonight. It was enough. The fever broke before dawn. Mave lay still for a moment and let the relief arrive properly. She had been afraid in the night, genuinely, the kind that lives in the body and not just the mind. She had not shown it, because showing it to a stranger in his own house at 3 in the morning was not something she was willing to do. She had managed it by putting it in the part of herself that was for later. Now, in the gray pre-dawn quiet, she let herself feel it. Clara was fine. She let that be true for a full minute before she got up. Jonah's chair was empty when she came out. The lamp had been turned down. The fire had been built back up. From the window she could see him in the yard, coat on, moving toward the barn with the walk of a man who had been awake for a while and had given the animals their patience. She went to the kitchen. She found the flour and the lard and the dried fruit from the pantry. She found the cast iron pan and the Dutch oven. She thought about the kitchen her mother had kept in the Appalachian foothills, the smell of wood smoke and river clay and biscuits going golden in the pan on a Saturday morning. She made breakfast the way you make it when you want to say thank you without making a person sit through the saying of it. Jonah came in from the barn at 6 and stopped in the kitchen doorway. The table had 2 cups on it. The biscuits were in the Dutch oven. The kitchen smelled like coffee made with care. He looked at the table. "Clara," he said first, before the food or the cups or anything else. "Fever broke before dawn," she said. "She's sleeping." He sat down. They ate in the particular quiet of 2 people who have been awake in the same house at 3 in the morning and have moved past the stage of requiring ordinary conversation to fill the space. He ate 2 biscuits. She drank her coffee. Outside, the road was drying in the October morning. "Road will be passable by noon," he said. "I know," she said. He looked at her. She looked at her cup. Neither of them mentioned what noon meant or where the road went past noon. He finished his coffee. He looked at the window, at the drying road and the October sun going across the valley. He had not turned a page since he sat down. "A few more days," he said. Not a question. "Clara needs the rest," she said. "Yes," he said. He stood up and put on his coat and went back to the barn. Mave washed the dishes and looked at the road through the kitchen window and thought, both of us are watching the road dry and hoping for different reasons that it takes longer than it should. She did not leave at noon. Clara was not ready to travel, fragile in the way of a baby whose system has been taxed, and who needed warmth and stillness rather than a wagon road and October air. The days established a shape without discussion, the way 2 practical people in the same space naturally divide the work. Jonah ran the ranch. Mave ran the house. She cleaned properly, not performing domesticity, but the kind of cleaning a house gets when someone who understands households pays it attention. She found the good dishes in the back of the cupboard. She reorganized the pantry with the logic of someone who knows how to make a supply of food last a winter. On the second morning, she moved the coffee. Jonah came in from the barn at mid-morning and opened the pantry and stood in front of it for a full 10 seconds, confused. "Where did you put the coffee?" he said. "Where it stays dry," she said without looking up from the account book she had found in the desk drawer and was quietly horrified by. It had stayed dry where it was. It had also stayed invisible beneath 3 sacks of beans. He found the coffee. He made it. He stood at the counter and drank it and looked at the reorganized pantry with the expression of a man conducting a reassessment. "The flour," he said. "Second shelf, left side." He found it without looking. He said nothing. But the following week, when Luke Fenner's wife came by with a pot of broth after hearing that Jonah had taken in a woman and child from the storm, Jonah directed her to the pantry for a jar of preserves and found it on the first attempt. He looked at the shelf. He looked toward the kitchen. He said nothing about that either. Mrs. Fenner, who missed nothing, filed it. Clara was awake during the visit, conducting her usual comprehensive assessment of the new arrival. Mrs. Fenner received this assessment with the warmth of a woman who appreciated being evaluated by a baby. "She's strong," she told Mave. "Strong from the beginning," Mave said. Mrs. Fenner looked at Jonah, who was holding Clara because Mave's hands were occupied with the broth. He was holding her with the careful, deliberate attention of a man who has not held many babies and is taking the responsibility seriously. Clara was looking at him with the focused attention of someone filing important information. Mrs. Fenner filed that, too. She left after an hour and told her husband that evening that things were developing at the Calloway ranch, and that she intended to monitor the situation closely. He said that sounded like their business, not hers. She said that was an interesting perspective, and ignored him. The evenings were when the house changed. Daytime had its work, Jonah outside, Mave inside, the ranch running with the efficiency of 2 practical people who communicated through the information left behind, firewood res tacked, a harness oiled on the porch, a missing button on a shirt replaced without comment. But evenings brought them both to the fire. On the fourth evening, Mave said without looking up from the mending, "Why did you name the horse August?" He looked up from his book. "He came to me in August. I'm not a complicated man about names." "Clara came to me in June," she said. "I almost named her June." "What stopped you?" "I looked at her in the first minute and I thought, this is not a June. This is someone who will have opinions." He looked across the room at Clara, who was awake on the blanket and engaged in the ongoing examination of her hands. "She does have opinions," he said, "about everything." "The hands have been a major preoccupation for the past 2 weeks, Mave said. He watched the baby for a moment. "She's trying to figure out how they work," he said. "She's trying to figure out who she is," Mave said. "The hands are just where she started." He looked at her. She looked at the mending. Something passed between them in the firelight that neither of them named. On the 6th evening, he bought something for Clara at the Coulter Creek General Store without mentioning it, a small knitted cap, the kind that tied under the chin, sized for a baby in a Montana Territory October. He set it on the table when he came in. Mave looked at it. She looked at him. "You didn't need to do that," she said. "She was cold on the porch," he said. "I can manage." She started to speak. He looked at her. She stopped. She picked up the cap and looked at it. It was the right size. He had measured correctly, or guessed correctly, which meant he had been paying attention to the specifics of Clara in a way that went beyond the practical. "Thank you," she said. "But next time," she held his gaze, "ask me. I can tell you what she needs." He held her gaze. "You're right," he said. "I will." She put the cap on Clara, who received it with the tolerant dignity of a baby who has views about hats but is willing to compromise when the alternative is cold. Jonah watched this, and something in his face was the expression of a man who has just been told something true that he needed to hear, and who is deciding to keep it. She told him on the 8th evening. She had been planting signals for 3 days. Jonah had seen her check the road from the kitchen window twice that morning, had seen her react when a rider passed the south fence, had found a folded document in her coat pocket when he moved it from the hook, one she had taken back quickly with the specific motion of someone protecting something they are not ready to share. He had waited. She told him after supper, with Clara asleep. She told him about Thomas, their 6 years on a small Kentucky property in a county in the foothills of the Appalachians, a good marriage built on working the same land and wanting the same things. Thomas had taken sick in July, barely 3 weeks after Clara was born, and was gone 11 days later. The fever had been quick and total, and had left Mave with an infant and a small property and a brother-in-law who arrived at the funeral with his hands already calculating the value of what Thomas had left behind. Garrett Alder wanted the property, the small piece of land Thomas had bought in their 3rd year of marriage, the one with the best water access in the valley, the one Garrett had been trying to acquire for 8 years before Thomas bought it. He had paid for the funeral when Mave did not have the money immediately available. He had used the owing of it as the beginning of a claim. Then the petition, filed with the Justice of the Peace in Harlan County, that Mave Alder was a recently widowed woman with no family, insufficient income, unsuitable for raising an infant. The petition had not yet been heard. It was not a guardianship order, but the Justice of the Peace in Harlan County had known Garrett Alder for 20 years, and Garrett had built his mill on land the Justice's family had sold him. She had not waited to find out how the hearing would go. She had sold what she could, taken the train west as far as the money allowed, then a diligent stage to the edge of Montana Territory, then the last 6 days on foot and in borrowed wagon beds toward nowhere specific except away. Jonah was quiet through all of it, in the way he was quiet when he was taking something seriously. When she finished, she looked at her hands on the table. "Thomas left that land to Clara and me," she said. "Garrett paid for a coffin. He did not buy my daughter with it." She looked up at him. I know that the justice of the peace in Harland County may not agree. He held her gaze. Does Garrett know which direction you went? Not precisely, she said. He knows I don't have connections north. He'll start south and work his way toward the territory lines. How close behind you? She thought about the days. 5 days. Maybe 4. Jonah nodded slowly. He had the expression of a man doing arithmetic with more variables than he had started with. A petition that hasn't been heard is not an order, he said. And a Harland County petition has no force here. This is Lewis and Clark County. Different court, different territory. He held her gaze. Garrett Alder can ride into Coulter Creek with a piece of paper, and the paper means nothing here unless our local justice decides to honor it. He paused. Edgar Cole is our local justice. I've known him for 15 years. She looked at him across the table. Jonah, she said. Yes. You don't have to. I know that, he said. Let me go talk to Edgar tomorrow before Garrett does. She looked at her hands. She thought about 6 days of moving alone because needing people was a transaction with unpredictable terms. She thought about a man who had not asked her to explain herself and had sat in a corner chair until 3 in the morning and had bought a hat the right size without being told the measurement, and had said, "Next time, ask me," and meant it. Go, she said. He nodded. He did not say anything else. Sometimes the right response to trust is simply to receive it without decoration. He arrived on a Friday. Mave had been at the Callaway Ranch for 10 days when Jonah came in from the south pasture, moving faster than his usual pace. He's in town, Jonah said. Mave was at the kitchen counter with Clara in the carry cloth. She stopped. Luke Fenner passed the south fence an hour ago, he said. Stranger at the Coulter Creek Hotel asking about a woman traveling alone with a baby. Harland County document. 2 men with him. She wiped her hands on the cloth. She looked at Clara, asleep against her chest. I should go, she said. Where? Jonah said. The question landed correctly. She had $4.60 and a baby and October in Montana Territory and nowhere specific to go toward. She had been running because staying had seemed more dangerous than moving. She had stopped here because a man had held out his hand in the rain. I'll go to Edgar Cole this afternoon, Jonah said, before Garrett does. His paper may be weak, she said. Weak is not the same as harmless. No, Jonah said, which is why I'm going today. He looked at her. Edgar will want to hear from you, too. Can you come tomorrow morning? She looked at him. Yes, she said. He put on his coat. He put on his hat. Then he stopped at the door. Mave, he said. She looked at him. This time I'm asking, he said. I'll go to Edgar and explain the situation, but your voice matters more than mine in this. It's your daughter and your property and your case. Edgar needs to hear from you directly. She held his gaze. Something settled in her chest, not relief exactly, but the recognition of a man who had heard what she had said about the hat and had changed the way he moved. Go, she said. I'll be here when you get back. He went. The Coulter Creek Justice of the Peace had been doing his job for 14 years with the disposition people called fair, which in practice meant he made decisions based on what was in front of him rather than what was convenient. Jonah arrived at Edgar's office at 2 in the afternoon. He told Edgar what Mave had told him, plainly, in order. The marriage, Thomas's death 3 weeks after Clara was born, Garrett's petition in Harland County, a petition not an order, not yet heard, the property dispute, the funeral debt used as leverage, 6 days of travel to get here. Edgar listened. He asked 3 questions. Then he said, bring her to me tomorrow morning, early. I want her testimony before Garrett presents whatever he's carrying. He looked at Jonah. The petition is weak from what you describe. A petition filed in Harland County with no hearing yet is not a guardianship order, and I have no obligation to honor it. But weak is not the same as dismissed. And if Garrett gets to me first with a sympathetic story, and I've only heard your account, he held Jonah's gaze, bring her tomorrow. Jonah stood to go. Edgar looked at him with the eyes of a man who has known someone for 15 years and is seeing something that has been coming for a while. You're planning to ask her to stay, Edgar said. It was not quite a question. Jonah looked at his hat. Yes, he said. And if Garrett weren't coming? Jonah was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said again. The trouble is only what made me say it sooner. Edgar held his gaze. Go home, Jonah. Bring her here at 8. Jonah drove the 2 miles back to the ranch in the October afternoon and thought about a baby who had found her hands and a woman who had made breakfast without being asked in a house that had been quiet for 3 years. He had told Mave that weak was not the same as harmless. He understood now that the same was true of what he felt. It was not loud or performed or certain, but it was not nothing. It had not been nothing for some time. They went to Edgar together the next morning. Mave sat across from the justice of the peace and told her own account: Thomas's death, the property, the petition, Garrett's claim, the funeral debt used as a door into her life that she had not agreed to open. She told it clearly and without embellishment, the way a woman tells something she has been carrying and has decided to put down in the right place. Edgar listened. He asked 4 questions. Then he said, Mrs. Alder, a petition not yet heard in Harland County is not enforceable here. I am not obligated to honor it, and I will not honor it without a formal hearing in this jurisdiction, which I will schedule if Mr. Alder presents himself and provides credible grounds. He held her gaze. If he arrives with his document, he will be heard, and so will you, equally. They drove back to the ranch. Garrett arrived at 3 in the afternoon, 2 men with him, the configuration of a man who wanted to appear to have authority. Jonah was in the yard when the wagon came up the track. Mave was on the porch. She had not hidden. He had not asked her to. Garrett got down from the wagon and looked at Jonah and then at Mave on the porch and then back at Jonah. That's my brother's wife, he said. And my brother's child. I have a document. I know about the document, Jonah said. Edgar Cole knows about the document. Garrett looked at Mave on the porch. Rosemary. Mave, she said. She had come down the steps. She was standing in the yard now, Clara on her hip. My name is Mave. Thomas knew the difference. You do, too. Garrett looked at her. The petition is a petition, she said. Not heard, not decided, not an order. Her voice was entirely level. You paid for Thomas's coffin. I am grateful. You did not buy my daughter with it. She held his gaze. Thomas left that property to Clara and me. If you have a legal claim to it, present it to Edgar Cole at a proper hearing. That is the process. She looked at him steadily. That is the only process I will participate in. Garrett looked at the 2 men who had come with him. One of them was looking at his hands. The other was looking at the road behind them. They were men who had agreed to accompany a document, and the document had encountered a woman who knew what it was and was not. Jonah stepped forward. He stood beside Mave, not in front of her, beside her. Mrs. Alder has made herself clear, he said. Edgar Cole is available Monday if you want to file properly. Garrett looked at Mave once more. He looked at whatever he had come to take, and the specific impossibility of taking it from a woman who was standing in a yard telling him exactly what the law said. He got back in the wagon. The 2 men got back in the wagon. He drove back down the track. The yard went quiet. Even Clara forgot for a moment to conduct her assessment. Jonah stood beside Mave and looked at the road where Garrett had gone. You didn't need me, he said. No, she said. But I was glad you were there. She looked at him. He looked at her. Ask me, she said. He turned. He looked at her with the direct eyes that had been consistent since the road. Would you still ask me to stay, she said, if no one were chasing me? He held her gaze for a long moment. Yes, he said. The trouble is only what made me say it sooner. She looked at the valley, at the ranch, at the mountains, and the October light going gold. Ask me properly, she said. He took off his hat. He held it in both hands. Mave Alder, he said. Will you stay? She held his gaze with the dark eyes that had been assessing things since before he pulled her up onto a bench in the rain. Yes, she said simply, the way she said everything that mattered. He told her that evening, after supper, Clara asleep in the main room, the fire going somber. He told her about Ruth, 14 years on the same land and wanting the same things, about the pregnancy in the spring of 1883 and the particular happiness of that summer, about the night in October when the baby came too early and too wrong, about James, the name they had chosen, about the hours between, about sitting beside Ruth, understanding that some things had no resolution you could work toward, only a fact you had to receive, about both of them gone by morning. He told it without looking for her reaction. She received it the way she received most things, with attention and without performance. The cradle, she said, reflective. My father made it before James was born. He looked at the fire. He died the following year. I kept the cradle because putting it away felt like giving up something I hadn't decided to give up yet. She was quiet for a moment. Then how long did it take to get up in the morning? The first year I got up because the cattle needed it, he said. The second year because it was what you did. He paused. The third year I started waking up earlier. 5 instead of 6. Earlier every week. Why? She said. I don't know, he said. He looked at the window. Like something was going to happen that I didn't want to miss. She looked at him across the table. She thought about a man who had been waking up earlier and earlier without knowing why, and had driven to Coulter Creek on a Tuesday in October, and had not been able to drive past a woman standing in the rain with a baby. She thought about arithmetic, and the way some sums cannot be solved alone. Jonah, she said. Yes. She stood up. She went to the main room. She came back a moment later. The cradle, she said. Clara's been sleeping on the bed with me. She rolls. He looked at her. She could sleep in the cradle, she said, if you want. He was very still. Then he got up. He went to the chest in the main room and took out a folded blanket, small, soft, made for a specific purpose. He held it for a moment. He brought it to the room where Clara slept and put it in the cradle. He came back. He sat at the table. She sat at the table. The fire was warm and Clara was asleep, and the Montana Territory October night was enormous outside. Jonah, she said. Yes. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held hers. They sat like that for a while, which was not a declaration and was not a promise, but was the beginning of both, and that was enough for that night. Garrett Alder did not return. He presented himself to Edgar Cole on Monday, as Jonah had said he could. Edgar received him politely and told him that without a formal hearing, an unfiled petition from Harlan County carried no weight in Lewis and Clark County, and that if he wished to pursue a guardianship claim, he was welcome to retain a Montana Territory attorney and proceed through the proper channels, which would take a minimum of 6 months, and which Edgar anticipated he would not win. Garrett left Coulter Creek on Wednesday. In December, a letter arrived from the former clerk in Harlan County, a man who had witnessed Thomas's will and had been troubled by Garrett's petition since it was filed. He confirmed in writing that Thomas had left the property specifically to Mave and Clara, that the petition had been filed without adequate grounds, and that 2 neighbors were prepared to testify to Mave's fitness as a mother if the matter ever proceeded. He had been waiting, he wrote, for a safe address to which to send it. Mave read the letter at the kitchen table. She looked at Jonah. "He kept records," she said. "Honest people usually do," Jonah said. She folded the letter and put it in the drawer where she kept Clara's documents. Then she made coffee, and they talked about whether to sell the Kentucky property, or whether Clara should one day decide for herself. "It's hers," Mave said. "She should decide." "Yes," Jonah said. "She should." The winter passed in the way of Montana Territory winters, demanding and beautiful in roughly equal measure, with enough cold to close the world down to the immediate and enough quiet to make the immediate matter more. There was an evening in January when they disagreed properly for the first time, about the accounts, specifically about whether Jonah had been overcharged by the feed supplier for the 3rd month in a row, or whether the discrepancy was a recording error. It was a genuine disagreement conducted with the mutual respect of 2 people who both believed they were correct and were willing to check. She was right. He acknowledged it without difficulty. She noted that he acknowledged it without difficulty, which was its own kind of information. There was an afternoon in February when Luke Fenner's wife came for a visit and spent 3 hours in the kitchen with Mave, and afterward told her husband she had confirmed what she had suspected in October, and that the spring wedding she was anticipating would be the best thing to happen in Coulter Creek since the Hendersons' barn raising. Her husband said that was their business, not hers. She said that was still an interesting perspective. There was a Sunday in March when Jonah came in from the south fence to find Mave at the kitchen table helping Clara practice sitting up. Clara was 7 months old by then and had opinions about gravity that she was working through. He stood in the doorway and watched the 2 of them and thought about the cradle with the blanket in it, and a house that had been maintained without being inhabited, and the specific difference between the 2. This is what I was waking up for, he thought, not the trouble that made him say it sooner, the ordinary Sunday morning of it. They married in April, in the Coulter Creek Church, on a Saturday morning, with the Montana Territory spring outside, snow gone from the lower valley, grass coming in, mountains still white above the first green. Edgar Cole was in the 2nd row. He considered himself responsible for the outcome and intended to be present for it. Luke Fenner's wife was in the 3rd row. She had been there since 7 in the morning, which she considered her right. The Reverend performed the ceremony with the expression of a man who has married 200 couples and considers some of them better investments than others. Jonah wore his good coat, the one Ruth had liked, because he understood that beginning something new did not require discarding what had come before. It required carrying it forward with honesty. Mave wore a dress she had made herself, blue, the color she had been wearing on the road, because it seemed right to begin with the same color she had arrived in. Clara was 10 months old and walking unsteadily with the confident ambition of a baby who has decided that bipedal locomotion is the next problem to be solved and is solving it regardless of what the evidence suggests about readiness. She walked 2 steps during the ceremony and sat down deliberately and looked at the congregation as if to confirm they had witnessed this. They had witnessed it. After the ceremony, in the churchyard in the April morning, Edgar Cole appeared at Jonah's side. He looked at Clara, who was in Jonah's arms. She was looking at Edgar with the full assessment. He allowed this. He looked at Jonah over Clara's head. "Your father would have liked this," he said. "I know," Jonah said. Edgar retrieved his dignity from Clara's reach and went to find his wife. Luke Fenner's wife appeared next. She looked at Mave and then at Jonah and then at Clara and said, "I knew in October, when he couldn't find the coffee." Mave looked at her. "I moved the coffee on the 2nd day." "I know," Mrs. Fenner said. "He found it in 30 seconds. She went to talk to the Reverend." Jonah looked at Mave. "She's been watching since the 2nd day, apparently. Is that surprising?" "No," he said. "That's entirely consistent with Mrs. Fenner." Mave almost laughed. He saw it arrive and start and complete. He held Clara a little tighter and thought about a road in October and a hand held out in the rain and a house that had been built for 2 and had been won for 3 years. He walked across the churchyard to his wife and daughter. Clara approved of the direction. The ranch was better with 3 people. Mave managed the household accounts with the precision that had horrified her when she first saw them, and organized them into a system that the Coulter Creek General Store owner eventually asked her to explain, because the Callaway orders had become the most precisely specified in his ledger. She told him imprecise ordering was imprecise spending. He wrote it down. Clara walked properly by November. She went to the barn at every available opportunity and had views about the horses that she communicated in the emphatic pre-language of a child who is certain she is being understood. She went to the south fence with Jonah on Tuesday mornings and sat in the grass and attempted to eat dirt with the philosophical acceptance of a child who has decided the world is worth tasting. Jonah had a theory about this. She's trying to figure out what everything is, he told Mave. She started with her hands, Mave said. Now she's moved to the ground. By spring, she'll have strong opinions about the fence posts. She already has opinions about the fence posts, Jonah said. She told me this morning. On an evening in early November, with Clara asleep and the fire going and the Montana Territory dark and enormous outside, Mave sat at the kitchen table with the accounts and looked up at Jonah, who was reading in the chair by the fire. He had not turned a page in 10 minutes. She watched him for a moment. He looked up. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. She went back to the accounts. "Then, Jonah." "Yes." She looked at the table. She looked at him. "If it's a boy," she said. He went very still. He looked at her with the eyes that had been direct since a rainy road in October. Something arrived in his face, not surprise, something that had been possible for a while and had now become real. He set the book down entirely. He looked at the fire. He looked at the cradle in the corner of the room where Clara had slept her first months in this house. "James," he said. "Not because he would replace anyone," she said, "because the name still belongs in this house." He held her gaze for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "It does." She went back to the accounts. He picked up his book. The fire was warm, and outside the Montana Territory November was cold and enormous, and the house was exactly the right size, and the name James was in the room with them, no longer only the weight of what was lost, but also the shape of what was coming. And that, the house and the ranch and the accounts and the fire and Clara asleep in the next room, was exactly and completely right. Jonah Callaway had once believed the cradle was proof of everything the house had lost. That winter, when Clara slept in it, and Mave's account book lay open beside his coffee, he understood that it had also been waiting. That is the whole of it. A man who stopped because his father told him to stop. A woman who asked only for a barn and found something she did not know she was looking for. A baby who evaluated everyone she met with the serious attention of someone for whom all arrivals were equally significant, and who reached her conclusions without apology. Some storms do not arrive to destroy. Some arrive to deliver.